Good morning. Good to have you all here today. If it's your first Sunday, welcome. It's a little bit of an unusual Sunday for us in that we're trying something we've not done before. We're trying something we call Family Fifth Sunday. We've asked we normally have a junior church for kids first through fifth grade, or kindergarten through fifth grade. I'm not sure exactly, and so those kids are with us today. And if you are one of the kids who are with us today, if you want it, was supposed to be a bag given to you when you came in by the ushers. Has a way to follow along with the sermon there, either follow the outline or to follow with the collaring page. I think it has a snack in there too. And even as an adult, if you'd rather follow along with a collaring page and a snack, there's still some bags in the back there, and you can go get you one as you have it. I was supposed to announce, so I don't forget here, there's a white Toyota Corolla in the parking lot that's locked and the lights are on. So if that's you and you want to subtly in a minute slide out there and check on that, I was supposed to announce that too. I don't want to forget. So it's kind of an unusual Sunday. The kids program the last little bit has been talking about we can trust God. We can trust God no matter what. We can trust God even when it seems hard. We can trust God even when it seems like God's on the wrong path. Even when, like same thing we sang. His ways are perfect, even when we don't always know right away that they're perfect. We can trust Him to come through and to take care of us. So finishing and kind of continuing that theme here that the kids were in, today's sermon kind of is more about their series than it is about ours. And we're going to talk about Moses and him taking the Israelites out of Egypt. One story, I was reminded of it getting ready for the sermon, and it was a long time ago, and you'd have to be a pretty intense sports fan to remember this, but it was right when I was getting ready to go to college. There was a football coach who became kind of famous for a little while. Brent Musburger did a story about him, and he had ALS. His name's David Herbert, and he's in the Mississippi High School Football Coach Hall of Fame mostly because of this game. He was coaching a little school called Tishomingo, and they were playing their last game of the season against Faulkner, and they're ahead by 2 points, and they have the ball, and they're 35 yards away from the end zone, and there's 7 seconds left. And the coach called the play in, and the kids didn't want to run it. The coach called the play in, and the kids didn't want to run it. They started arguing amongst themselves out there in the huddle, yelling back at the bench for him to change the call, which is crazy unusual. And they argued enough and long enough they got a delay of game flag thrown. They're still up 2 points. Still 7 seconds left, but now they're 40 yards away from the end zone. And they're still arguing. They argued enough and long enough, they got a second delay of game penalty called on them. So now they're still up by 2 points, still 7 seconds left in the game, but now they're 45 yards away from the end zone. And they finally agreed to run the play that the coach called. The ball was snapped, they tossed it to their fastest guy, and he ran in the opposite direction, all the way to the other side's touchdown, scored a safety, game's tied, we're going to overtime. Well, the crowd starts booing, right? What's going on? And now you know why the kids were arguing about it, and they're booing, and why didn't you take the win? Well, the coach knew that Mississippi, the rules for high school football, didn't just determine on wins and losses, that if you were it wasn't just wins and losses, it was how many points you scored compared to how many points you gave up. And he knew they needed to beat Faulkner by at least 4 points so they wouldn't go to the playoffs, and he calculated his odds. What's our chances of scoring on one last play versus going to overtime and doing it there? And he decided his odds were better to go to overtime. So that's what they did. And they did win by a touchdown, and they got to go on to the playoffs. And like I said, Brent Musburger, Paul Harvey had a story on it. All the different networks had a little thing. And the coach was real humble about the thing. He said, it's the only thing we could have done. I mean, we're not just playing for this game. We're playing for the whole season. We're playing for all these kids. We're trying to do something here. And I think you can see the application, right? I mean, sometimes it's hard to trust the play that's been given. You can't see at all how that could work to your advantage. You can't see at all how that could work to what you want to do. But God has a plan. And sometimes His plans and His ways aren't the same ways as ours. And sometimes it may seem like what is a setback to you may be exactly what God had in mind. And so we have to trust in those moments that God knows what He's doing, that God has always been faithful before, and that God will be faithful again. So as I get into this thing, just in case you're not familiar with this part of the Bible, at the end of the book of Genesis, which is the first book of the Bible, Israel, which at that time is just one man's family, really, just sons and grandsons, there's like 70 of them, decide to go to Egypt at the end of Genesis because there's a famine in Israel. And so they decide, in the country of Israel, and so they decide to go to Egypt, well, not in Egypt, in Goshen, which is right by Egypt, and they're going to settle there. And they'll just raise their crops and their flocks and do all that there. But the Egyptians pretty quickly enslave them. The Egyptians are a much bigger culture, a much stronger group, and they enslave the Israelites. And for the next 400 years, they enslave them. And Israel continues to grow, but they're treated brutally by the Egyptians. There's one episode where they try to kill all the baby boys so that this population control kind of stuff, where they're trying to manage how big the slave population gets, and a lot of violence against the Israelites. And they cried out to God for help, and God sends Moses to go rescue them. And that's the first part of Exodus, and that's where our story starts. Moses has been hitting Egypt with all manner of plagues, and now they've been set free, and they're allowed to go and worship God and become their own nation. So this is a story of how a nation of slaves became a holy nation, how a nation of slaves became a kingdom of priests. Well, it says that they were led as they were leaving Egypt by God himself, that God was in front of the caravan as they're marching out of Egypt, and he's a pillar of cloud by day, and he's a pillar of fire at night. And so they can look up and see God. I mean, it's not, sometimes we would like to say about ourselves, if I could just have some proof that God was there, I would believe in him. Well, they had it. I mean, God is visible in front of them all the time. They can look up at any point of the day or night and see that God is right there in the camp. But what's weird to me, at least, and you could do a whole nother sermon on this, they kind of got used to it. I don't know how you'd ever get used to that, but they did, and they start doing things apart from God. They have a hard time being obedient, even though they can see him right there all the time. I think that's curious. And it teaches me something. Whenever I'm tempted to pray, God, just make yourself more obvious and I'll believe. I don't know if that necessarily, those things go together like sometimes we think they do. But that's, like I said, a whole nother sermon. So they're leaving Egypt, and all the people are behind Moses, and hey, we're a new nation, here we go, now things are happening. And they're making their way across the desert. But instead of taking the shortcut, which would have been staying right along the Mediterranean Sea, he kind of goes across country, kind of heads due east and marches straight towards the Red Sea and kind of pins himself there. And God tells Moses ahead of time, I'm doing this on purpose. I want you to see my power, the Israelites, but I also want Pharaoh and Egypt to see my power one last time. So I'm going to harden his heart. I'm going to make him chase you so that everybody will know that I'm God, and there'll be one last big evidence that I'm God as we start this endeavor. Well, Pharaoh, just like God said, comes to regret it. I can't believe we let the slaves go. What are we going to do for our work and stuff? And so he loads up all of his chariots. The Egyptians were very proud of their chariots. He loads up all their chariots and takes his very best soldiers, and they march out after the Israelites. And when the Israelites see him coming, Pharaoh and all of his troops, at this time, Egypt is the most powerful army in the world. And when they see them coming, they're terrified. So that kind of gets us to our first point. If you have one of those things in the bag, you can fill it out. You don't have to fill it out. It's up to you. We're not collecting them at the end. It really is you if it helps you to follow along. But the point is that sometimes God allows trouble so that we will trust him. Now remember, God tells Moses ahead of time, I'm going to on purpose trap you here. I'm going to on purpose bring Pharaoh out. All of this thing is going exactly the way that God plans for it to go. But the people don't know that. All the people know is it looks terrifying. All the people know is it looks frightening and scary and awful. And that's how our lives go. Sometimes we go through some awful stuff. If you believe that God is sovereign, that he's completely in charge, like I do, then you have to, at some level, believe that whenever a bad thing happens, that God has allowed that to happen. He could have stopped it, but for reasons maybe only known to him, he chose not to. And so God, who could have stopped it, chooses not to. Well, why would he do that? Well, sometimes God allows us to go through trouble so that we will trust him. When I was a kid, we had horses, and a couple of our horses were kind of finicky and kind of hard to control, but one of our horses was really gentle. I mean, just as tame as could be, and she was real fast, but you just kind of had a hard time amping her up to do very much of anything exciting because she just really gentle. And I was riding one day, and I don't know, 9 or 10 or 11 years old. I wasn't super old, and a horsefly stung her up under the saddle. I saw the horsefly land on her, and it bit her, and she bucked me off. And she never ever did that. That wasn't how she operated. But she bucked me off, and I just a kid. So I was scared to get back up on her, and I grabbed the halter there, or the bridle, and I walked her back to the house. Now, Dad had seen all of it. He had been up by the barn there when all this happened. He saw it happen. And I came back, and I said, I think I'm done. Did you see that? Yeah, I saw that, but you can't be done yet. You need to get back on. And well, I didn't want to. Again, I was just a kid. Well, no, I don't have any interest at all in doing that. I didn't say it like that. I think I probably whined and cried. But he said, no, you gotta do it. It's important for the horse to know that you're in charge, and you can't let this be the last thing the horse remembers. You need to get up on the horse, ride again, it'll be fine. And I did. I didn't want to. And it was fine, though I was nervous the whole time. Every time it would twitch. And again, she's the gentlest horse in the world. But every time she would twitch, and horses twitch all the time, I'd be scared. Okay, here we go. And then, but it didn't work like that. Everything went just like my dad said. And by the time we got back, I was glad I did it. Now, he was taking some sort of a risk there. He's not a magic man. He knows that the horse could buck again. He knows I could get hurt. He knows all those things are possible. But by allowing me to face the risk of it, I became better at the end. I remember being a dad and Alicia, just a little kid, and she's got floaties on, and she's on the side of the pool, and I'm asking her to jump out to me. And she's scared. And whatever she decides is going to impact her. If she decides to stay on the side and not jump, she'll be a little less likely to take a risk next time. She'll be a little more scared next time. She'll have a little less trust in me. On the other hand, if she'll take the chance and jump out there to me where I can catch her, well, then she'll trust me that I can catch her. And even if she gets a little water in her nose, she'll trust me that she's going to be fine. And she'll get a chance to fly for just a second. You know, whatever you decide, there's risks. Whatever you decide, there's chances you take. But sometimes God allows us to take the risk, to take the hard things so that we learn to trust him. And I don't want to dig too deep into this because it's kind of a sad, morbid thing to think about. But for every one of us, of course, one day we're going to have to give everything away and go stand with God. I mean, one day we'll lay down our very lives and we'll have to go stand with God. I mean, one day we're going to have to trust him with all of it. And we all know that. We don't like to think about it, but we all know that to be true, right? I mean, this idea that God will never ask more of you than you can handle, that's just not true. That cliche, God will never give you more than you can handle, it's just not true. God will never give you more than you can handle with him. And he will get you through it as long as you hang on and trust him. All right, that's the first thing. Well, when the Israelites see it, of course, they start to grumble. They start to complain. They start to murmur. They say to Moses, was it because there was no graves in Egypt that you brought us out here? And they're murmuring. And we've done this before. Murmur is a cool word because it is what it sounds like. Murmur. Can you all just together murmur, 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 murmur? Yeah, that's what it sounds like. And they're all murmuring, right? They're all murmuring, and they're all kind of whispering to one another. And they're, we're going to die out here, they say. And they start to say to Moses, weren't we happy being slaves? I mean, weren't we happier in that situation? We never asked you to free us. We'd be happier being slaves. Now, nobody, of course, in an empty room with everything going right would ever choose slavery over freedom. Nobody would choose that. But when you're stressed, and when it looks dangerous, and when it looks risky, sometimes you might be tempted to be foolish about this thing. There's a story that I like, and I've told it before. It's my favorite story. It's my very favorite one. I know some of you have heard it before, because I've told it before. I've told it 2 or 3 times. But I know, like Chris said, some of you may have slept through those sermons earlier on, and you might have missed it. And it's my very favorite story. So hang with me. I think it's a good one, and it'll be over shortly. And if you're a kid, you can enjoy a snack during this, and it'll be over pretty quick. Gary Richmond, I got to hear him in California. He speaks a lot at churches in California. And before he went into ministry, he was a zookeeper. He was a veterinarian assistant in the San Diego Zoo. And he tells a story about caring for the snakes, that he didn't have to do much with the snakes. But there was one snake, a king cobra, that had a cut over its eye when it was a young, in his salad days, a young up-and-coming cobra. He had gotten into a fight with a mongoose, they thought, and he had gotten a scar on his eye. And so he kind of had a sinister look. He wasn't gentle looking like the other cobras. And so people wanted to see this snake when it was a popular attraction. But because of that scar on his eye, he wouldn't shed skin right. The skin would always hang up on his eye there. And so they would have to go in as a veterinarian and cut that cap off of the eye so that he wouldn't get infected, so he wouldn't get sick. Well, this was always a big deal. It's the most dangerous snake that they had, and he was great big. He's 6 foot long and just a monster of a snake. And so when it came time to do that, they called him, "Hey, it's time. We need you." And he and the veterinarian went down. The head herpetologist, the main fellow in charge of the snakes, he's right there in front of the cage where they'll open the door to let him out. They're behind the glass, they're on the other side where they're going to raise this concrete door, and then the snake will be right there. And he stands right in front of the door. Door's about 3 foot off the ground, so you could reach right in, easy to get to the snake. And he stands about 3 or 4 feet away from the door, and his 2 assistants are on both sides of the door. And so he says he's ready, and they open it up. Well, when it opens, the snake immediately, something new, something different, and the cobras are very territorial, and so he's up immediately, and he's a 6 foot long snake, and so about 2 feet up in the air, so he's about eye level with the guy standing with a 3 foot cage. He's about eye level with them, and he kind of scans at all of them, and then lunges at the, I didn't know this, but Richmond says that those big snakes can kind of roar. There's a noise they make, which that would be worse. I mean, as bad as it all is, this would be worse if that's true. But the snake kind of lunges at him there, strikes at him, and the head guy is so smooth. He just kind of turns quickly, grabs the snake behind the back of the head, and puts him on the ground. And the 2 assistants come in there and hold it so the snake won't thrash around and hurt itself. And they nod at the veterinarian and at Gary to come over and do the procedure. Well, towards the end of the procedure, the head snake guy, who's still holding the cobra down, says to Gary Richmond, "Do you have any cuts on your hands?" And he looks at him. He goes, "No." "Well, look close." He goes, "No, I think they're fine." He says, "Okay, well, go to the side there, get as many paper towels as you can in a softball-sized wad, and bring them back, and I'm going to have you put them in the cobra's mouth." "What?" He said, "Yeah, I'm going to have you put them in there." And so again, this time I say I really looked at my hands to make sure there were no cuts anywhere I could see, and there weren't. So I did it, and I put it down there, just inched it closer, and finally the snake bit at it, and just chomped it until it was just yellow with venom, the ball. And as he's doing this, the cobra's biting this. The head herpetologist, he says, a cobra can drop an elephant in the wilderness. If they get a good bite, a cobra with full venom sacs, if you could spread that out, you could kill 1,000 men with it. And if he were to bite me with a full load, it wouldn't matter that we have the antidote right here. I'd never survive it. And we've been working on this guy for 15 minutes. My hands are cramping, and they're sweaty, and my arms are getting tired. And I just want to make sure it's empty if we can. And Richmond said, I was saying, "Okay, great, that's awesome." And he's backing up. But it went fine. He's a pro, right? He put the snake back in there. They closed the door, and it was fine. Nothing happened. But as they're walking away, he says to Richmond, "These dangerous snakes, they're really easy to catch if you know how. They're just hard to let go of." That's what sin's like. Any fool can get into sin. It's not hard. Anybody can make a bad decision. Anybody can go a little too far, listen to the wrong friends, jump into the wrong situation. Anybody can do that. But once you do it, Well, then getting out can be impossibly hard. You might find yourself lying to cover your tracks. You might find your character starting to change as you escape to do those things that you want to do that you know you shouldn't do. You know, as an adult, you can say, well, I'll never be like my mom or dad, or I'll never be like, this uncle or aunt that I had. I'll never do that. And then you get to be an adult and you find yourself doing the same stupid things they did. And you never planned to. It's just when the stress came, when the fear came, when the pressure came, you found yourself going back to things you knew. It's easy to get into sin. It's just hard to get out of it, right? And that's what the Israelites are doing here. Weren't we happier as slaves? Well, no, they weren't. But it's hard work to be free. It's hard work to hold on to Jesus. It's hard work to trust God. At least when you're a slave, you know what tomorrow is going to be. You know what the next day is going to be. It's going to be bleak, but you know what it is. And some people, the fear of this unknown, the fear of really trusting God on the edge, it's just too much. And so they complain. But Moses answered the people. He says, don't be afraid. He says, stand firm and you will see the deliverance the Lord will bring to you today. He says, the Egyptians you see today, you're never going to see them again. The Lord will fight for you. You only need to be still. And be still here, it has the tone of shut up. You only need to shut up, to be quiet, to quit talking, to quit whining. The Lord will fight for you. Just trust him. And then the Lord said to Moses, why are you still crying out? Just go tell the Israelites to move on. And there's a lesson here about prayer, too. It's good to pray. We should all pray more probably than we do. It's a good thing to pray. But you don't need to pray about stuff that God's been clear about. If God has been clear about it, you don't need to pray about it. He's already told you. Would God want me to lie here? No, he wouldn't. Would God want me to cheat on this thing? No, he wouldn't. Would God want me to leave my spouse and find a new one who I think I might like better? No, he wouldn't. I mean, you don't need to pray about it. You already know the answer to those questions. And that's what's happening here. They're crying out to God, and he's already told them what to do. Just keep moving. So, the second lesson. First lesson, God allows trouble so that we'll trust him. Second, when we do trust God, then he's going to fight for us. He's going to take care of it. He's going to do the dirty work so that maybe we don't have to. And so Moses takes off. He goes down to the Red Sea and he holds his staff over the water like God tells him to do. And God sends a wind and he splits the sea in two. And half the water is here and half the water is there, and this wind is blowing through and it's drying up the ground underneath so the Israelites can walk through it. And they do. They walk through on dry ground with water on both sides of them. Well, when the Egyptians, they're kind of held back. That pillar of cloud, that pillar of fire that was in front of them, the Israelites, it goes behind the Israelites and kind of keeps the Egyptians at a distance, right? It doesn't allow the Egyptians to get too close until the Israelites are mostly through the Red Sea, and then the pillar of cloud disappears. And when Pharaoh sees it, he charges out after the Israelites because he's Pharaoh, and he's got his chariots, and he's really confident about his strength and his power. But what good are chariots against God? And these very chariots that he's so proud of, it says the wheels start to break and they get hung up in the mud. The Israelites were able to go through the mud just fine, but the Egyptians can't because God's fighting for them against Egypt. And Moses gets to the other side and the Red Sea crashes back in and all the enemies of God are eliminated. And God's people celebrate. He took them where they were supposed to go because they chose to trust him, because they chose to put him first, because they chose to follow God. Even when it seemed crazy, even when it seemed difficult, even when it seemed like a challenge, God came through. And that's kind of the last lesson. God usually goes through the trouble and not around it. The famous stories in the Bible, David and Goliath, God doesn't make Goliath just pass out on the battlefield. David still has to fight him. Daniel in the lion's den, God doesn't turn the lions into kittens and make them, there's no magic trick to it that way. He still has to go down into the lion's den and deal with it. Noah still has to face the flood. Abraham still has to face the weight. I mean, you see it over and over and over again in Scripture that God doesn't usually go around the trouble, but he goes through it. And again, because of the stuff we talked about before, when we go through the trouble, we trust him. When we trust him, he fights for us. And all these things work together kind of in concert. God usually will allow you to go through the thing with him rather than around it. My grandkids, one of the movies that they like is Frozen, and there's a sequel, Frozen 2. And in the second one, in the sequel, in Frozen 2, the two main characters, if you're not familiar with this series, Anna and Elsa are sisters, and in the second movie, they're separated, and it looks like maybe Elsa has died. It looks like maybe Elsa is gone, and Anna realizes it, and she's in this cave by herself, and she thinks her sister is gone, and she sings this song, and it was a sad song when I heard it on the cartoon. It was sad then, but when you read the lyrics, it's pretty intense. Here's the lyrics of this song. It's called "The Next Right Thing." It says, "I've seen dark before, but not like this. This is cold and empty. This is numb. The life I knew is over. The lights are out. Hello, darkness." He says, "I followed you around, I always have, but you've gone to a place I cannot find, and this grief has a gravity." And what a powerful line that is. This grief has a gravity that pulls me down. But a tiny voice whispers in my mind, "You're lost and hope is gone, but you must go on and do the next right thing." Can there be a day without this night? I don't know anymore what's true. I can't find my direction. I'm all alone. The only star that ever guided me was you. How to rise from the floor when it's not you I'm rising for? But I'll just do the next right thing. I'll take one step and then step again. It's all I came to do, the next right thing. I won't look too far ahead. It's too much for me to take. But I break it all down to the next breath, the next step, the next choice is the one that I can make. And I walk through the night, and I stumble blindly towards the light, and I do the next right thing. Now, really, for a kid's song, it's pretty dark. In the middle of it, grief has a gravity, and hello, darkness, and I mean, it's pretty intense. But that lesson is a true lesson. Now, I don't have any illusion that Disney is trying to teach a godly principle here, but that is a godly principle. I mean, sometimes all you can do is the next right thing. That's all there is. If you start trying to think how I'm going to survive the next 10 years or 5 years or 20 years, that kind of, I'd rather be a slave, you tell God. Freedom is too hard. I'd rather go do it a different direction. I don't think I'm tough enough to be on my own. And God says, just do the next right thing. Why are you crying out to me for? Just get moving. Now, as Christians, we've been freed, of course, from a ruler much meaner than Pharaoh. The Bible makes use of the Exodus story to talk about our situation. That we were once, it says, blinded by the devil, that he had control of this world. He brags about it at one place, that all the kingdoms of the world are mine, and I can do whatever I want to with them. And we were part of that. Slaves to sin and slaves to him, but Jesus came to set us free from that slavery. Jesus paid for our lives with his very own, exchanging his life for ours. And now as Christians, when we make a decision to follow him, we've been through the water. That's what baptism is. The same way the Israelites went through the water to trust God, we allow ourselves to go through the water, and we come out on the other side new and clean. And all that stuff that happened then still speaks to us today. It's still true today. That no matter what you've been through, no matter what you're going through, no matter how messed up and upside down your life is, God is still on the other side. And he still will walk through it with you if you'll just be still and trust him and keep doing the next right thing. So, will the band come back up, if they don't mind? I'm going to pray for you. And if anybody needs to make any sort of a decision about anything, know that today is your day. And and you can come forward. There'll be people on the sides here who you can pray with, and they'll help walk you through whatever it is you need to do. Or you can go back to the back of the room, and there'll be somebody there at the door, usually has a name tag on there, and they'll go pray with you quietly if you'd rather go that direction and pray that way. But take advantage of today. Well, what a gift this is. A chance to be here with God, a chance to be here in this place, a chance to get to do business with the King of the universe, and He offers it to us. So take advantage. Let me pray with you. Dear Lord God, I thank you for this group. Father, I pray for whoever's here, that if they need to do business with you, if they need, Father, to make themselves right with you, that you give them the courage to do it. Father, for anybody here who has taken steps in the other direction, let them know that all they've got to do is do one right thing to be back in your good graces. It doesn't require a payback of years. Just one "I'm sorry" can unlock that door. And I pray, Father, for every one of us to have the courage we need to have to come close to you. In Jesus' name, amen.